Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. Growing up, my grandpa's cabin was my favorite place in the world. Nestled in the heart of the Ozarks, it was a rustic haven where I spent countless summers fishing, hiking, and making memories. The cabin itself wasn't anything fancy, just a simple two-bedroom structure with a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace. But to me, it was paradise. When Grandpa passed away last year, he left the cabin to me in his will. I was touched by his gesture and vowed to keep the place just as he'd left it, a tribute to the man who'd taught me so much about life and nature. Little did I know that my inheritance would soon become the center of a ridiculous drama involving an entitled neighbor, a property dispute, and a showdown that would test my patience like never before. It all started on a crisp autumn morning. I'd taken a week off work to winterize the cabin and do some general maintenance. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, leaves crunching under my tires, I noticed something odd. There was a shiny SUV parked in front of the cabin, and a woman I'd never seen before was standing on the porch peering through the windows. Confused and a bit annoyed, I got out of my truck and approached her. "Excuse me," I called out. "Can I help you with something?" The woman turned around, and I got my first good look at her. She was in her mid-40s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer sunglasses perched on her head. Her outfit screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," a pastel cardigan over a floral blouse, paired with white capri pants and wedge sandals. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Are you the realtor? I've been waiting for ages." I frowned, confused. "Realtor? No, ma'am. I'm the owner of this property. May I ask why you're here?" Her expression changed instantly, morphing from saccharine smile to indignant scowl. "Owner? That's impossible. This cabin is supposed to be mine." I blinked, taken aback by her statement. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. This cabin belonged to my grandfather, and he left it to me when he passed away last year." The woman's face turned an alarming shade of red. "No, no, no," she shrieked, stamping her foot like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "This is my cabin. I've had my eye on it for years, and the old man promised to sell it to me." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm in the face of this bizarre situation. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are or what you think my grandfather promised you, but I can assure you that this cabin is legally mine. I have the deed and all the necessary paperwork." She narrowed her eyes at me, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "Listen here, you little twerp. I am Karen Bradshaw, and I always get what I want. I've been planning to buy this cabin for my summer home, and I won't let some snot-nosed kid stand in my way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman, Karen, was clearly delusional. "Ms. Bradshaw," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I understand you're upset, but this is my property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen's face contorted with rage. "Leave? Leave? I'm not going anywhere. This cabin is mine, and I demand you hand over the keys right now." I stood my ground, crossing my arms over my chest. "That's not going to happen. Please leave the premises before I'm forced to call the authorities." She let out a shrill laugh that made me wince. "Go ahead and call them. They'll see that I'm right, and you'll be the one kicked off this property." Shaking my head in disbelief, I pulled out my phone and dialed the local sheriff's office. As it rang, Karen paced back and forth on the porch, muttering to herself and shooting daggers at me with her eyes. "Ozark County Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?" A gruff voice answered. "Hello, this is Jack Thompson. I'm at my grandfather's old cabin on Lakeside Drive, and there's a woman here who's refusing to leave. She's claiming the property belongs to her." The voice on the other end sighed, sounding weary. "Let me guess, blonde hair, drives a fancy SUV, goes by the name Karen?" I blinked in surprise. Yeah? How did you know?" "Son, we've had run-ins with Karen Bradshaw before. She's been causing trouble all over the county, trying to claim properties that aren't hers. Sit tight, I'll send Deputy Johnson out to handle the situation." Relieved that help was on the way, I thanked the dispatcher and hung up. Karen was still pacing, her face a mask of self-righteous anger. "The sheriff's office is sending someone out," I told her. "We'll get this sorted out soon." She sneered at me. "Oh, we certainly will. And when we do, you'll be packing your bags and handing over those keys." I sighed, leaning against my truck. This was not how I'd planned to spend my vacation. As we waited for the deputy to arrive, Karen alternated between ranting about her rights and making thinly veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't comply with her demands. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up the driveway. Deputy Johnson, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense expression, stepped out. "Afternoon, folks," he said, tipping his hat. "What seems to be the problem here?" Before I could open my mouth, Karen launched into a tirade. "Officer, I'm so glad you're here. This young man is trying to steal my property. I've been planning to buy this cabin for years, and now he's claiming it belongs to him. I demand you arrest him immediately." Deputy Johnson's expression didn't change as he turned to me. "And your side of the story, son?" I explained the situation calmly, telling him about inheriting the cabin from my grandfather and finding Karen here when I arrived. I also mentioned that I had all the legal documents proving my ownership. The deputy nodded, then turned back to Karen. Ms. Bradshaw, we've been through this before. You can't just claim properties as your own because you want them. Do you have any proof that you have a right to this cabin? Karen's face flushed even redder. I don't need proof. The old man who lived here promised to sell it to me. That's as good as a contract. Deputy Johnson shook his head. I'm afraid that's not how it works, ma'am. Without any legal documentation, you have no claim to this property. This is outrageous. Karen screeched. I'll have your badge for this. Don't you know who I am? My husband plays golf with the mayor. The deputy remained unimpressed. Be that as it may, Ms. Bradshaw, the law is the law. Now, I'm going to need you to leave this property immediately. Karen crossed her arms, a smug smile spreading across her face. I'm not going anywhere. This cabin is on my land, and I have every right to be here. Deputy Johnson raised an eyebrow. Your land, you say? Well, let's just take a look at the property lines, shall we? He walked back to his patrol car and retrieved a large rolled-up document. As he spread it out on the hood of his car, I recognized it as a survey map of the area. Now, Ms. Bradshaw, the deputy said, gesturing for her to come closer. According to the county records, your property line ends right here. He pointed to a spot on the map that was clearly a good distance away from where we were standing. Karen leaned in, her face screwed up in concentration. That can't be right, she muttered. I'm sure my property extends much further. Deputy Johnson shook his head. I'm afraid not, ma'am. The cabin and the surrounding 5 acres belong to Mr. Thompson here. You're currently trespassing on his land. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction as I watched the realization dawn on Karen's face. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. But, she sputtered, that's impossible. I've always assumed this was part of my property. Well, you know what they say about assuming, Ms. Bradshaw, Deputy Johnson said dryly. Now, I'm going to have to insist that you leave Mr. Thompson's property immediately. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to arrest you for trespassing. Karen's face contorted with rage. She looked from the deputy to me and back again, seemingly trying to decide if she could talk her way out of this situation. Finally, with a frustrated growl, she stomped her foot and screamed, "This isn't over. I'll be back with my lawyer, and we'll see who's trespassing then." She stormed off towards her SUV, her wedge sandals sinking into the soft earth with each angry step. As she reached her vehicle, she turned back to glare at us. "You haven't heard the last of me," she shrieked before climbing in and slamming the door. We watched in silence as she backed up, nearly hitting a tree in her haste to leave. Gravel sprayed from her tires as she peeled out of the driveway, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of her angry threats. Deputy Johnson turned to me with a weary smile. "Sorry about that, son. Karen Bradshaw's been a thorn in our side for a while now. You might want to consider putting up some no trespassing signs, just in case she decides to come back." I nodded, still a bit shell-shocked from the whole ordeal. "Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate your help." He tipped his hat again. "Just doing my job? You take care now, and don't hesitate to call if she gives you any more trouble." As I watched the patrol car disappear down the winding road, I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. What had started as a simple trip to winterize, the cabin had turned into a surreal confrontation with a living embodiment of entitlement. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my troubles with Karen Bradshaw. Over the next few weeks, I found myself dealing with a barrage of annoyances. True to her word, Karen didn't give up easily. She seemed determined to make my life miserable and somehow force me to give up the cabin. It started with a series of angry letters from her lawyer, full of vague threats and demands that I rectify the situation by selling her the property. Each one went straight into my file of things to laugh about later, and received a polite but firm response from my own attorney, reiterating that the cabin was mine and not for sale. Then came the phone calls. Somehow, Karen had gotten hold of my number and started calling at all hours of the day and night. Sometimes she'd rant and rave, other times she'd try to sweet-talk me into selling. I quickly learned to screen my calls and let everything go to voicemail. But Karen wasn't content with long-distance harassment. Oh no, she had to take things to the next level. One Saturday morning, about a month after our initial confrontation, I drove up to the cabin to do some maintenance. As I rounded the final bend in the road, my jaw dropped. There, sprawled across my driveway, was a garish yellow Hummer with Karen's cottage emblazoned on the side in hot pink letters. Parked behind it was a moving truck, and to my horror, I saw Karen directing a team of movers who were unloading furniture onto my front lawn. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of my truck, my blood boiling. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted as I stormed towards her. Karen turned, a triumphant smile on her face. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I'm just moving into my new summer home. Isn't it exciting?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Are you out of your mind? We've been through this already. This is my property." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that silly little misunderstanding? I've taken care of all that. My lawyer assures me that I have every right to be here." I pulled out my phone, ready to call the sheriff again, but Karen just laughed. "Go ahead, call them. I have all the paperwork right here." She patted a folder tucked under her arm. Gritting my teeth, I dialed the sheriff's office. To my relief, Deputy Johnson was on duty and said he'd be out shortly. In the meantime, I had to watch helplessly as Karen continued to direct the movers, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. When Deputy Johnson arrived, Karen practically skipped over to him, waving her folder. "Deputy, I'm so glad you're here. I have something to show you." She thrust the folder into his hands, beaming with pride. Deputy Johnson opened it and began to read, his expression growing more and more confused. "Ms. Bradshaw," he said slowly, "this isn't a deed. This is a certificate of participation from a real estate seminar." Karen nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. It proves that I'm a certified property owner. That means I can claim any property I want." The deputy pinched the bridge of his nose, looking like he was developing a migraine. "Ma'am, that's not how this works. At all. This certificate doesn't give you any rights to Mr. Thompson's property." Karen's smile faltered. But the man at the seminar said." "I don't care what the man at the seminar said," Deputy Johnson cut her off. "This certificate is worth less than the paper it's printed on. Now, for the last time, you need to leave this property immediately." Karen's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Then she let out an ear-piercing shriek that made everyone wince. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "I paid good money for that seminar. They promised me I could have any property I wanted." Deputy Johnson sighed. "Ms. Bradshaw, I think you've been scammed. I'd be happy to take a report about that seminar if you'd like, but right now you need to get your things and leave. You're trespassing, and if you don't comply, I will have to arrest you." Karen's tantrum reached new heights. She stamped her feet, pulled at her hair, and let loose a string of profanities that would make a sailor blush. The movers, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing unease, started quietly loading the furniture back onto their truck. "You can't do this to me," Karen screamed. "I'm a respectable member of the community. I'll have all your jobs for this." Deputy Johnson remained calm in the face of her meltdown. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Leave now, or I'll have no choice but to place you under arrest." For a moment, it looked like Karen might actually comply. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and turned towards her gaudy Hummer. But then, quick as a flash, she spun around and made a mad dash for the cabin. "If I can't have it, no one can," she shrieked, pulling something out of her pocket. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw a glint of metal. Was that a knife? A gun? I braced myself for the worst, but what happened next was so bizarre that for a moment, I thought I must be dreaming. Karen reached the porch and began furiously, stapling pieces of paper to the wooden railings and posts. As she worked, I could see that each sheet had Karen's property printed on it in large bold letters. Deputy Johnson and I exchanged bewildered looks before springing into action. We reached Karen just as she was trying to staple a sheet to the front door. "That's quite enough, Ms. Bradshaw," the deputy said, gently but firmly taking the stapler from her hands. "You're under arrest for trespassing and vandalism." As he read Karen her rights and led her to his patrol car, she continued to rant and rave. "This isn't over," she yelled over her shoulder at me. "I'll be back. You'll see. This cabin will be mine." I watched in stunned silence as Deputy Johnson helped Karen into the back of his patrol car. The movers, eager to be done with this circus, had finished reloading the truck and were already pulling out of the driveway. Karen's yellow Hummer sat abandoned in my driveway, a gaudy reminder of the surreal events that had just unfolded. As the dust settled and the sound of sirens faded into the distance, I was left standing in front of my grandfather's cabin, surrounded by a sea of stapled papers proclaiming it as Karen's property. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Shaking my head, I set about removing the papers and repairing the minor damage from Karen's stapling frenzy. As I worked, I couldn't help but wonder if this would truly be the end of my troubles with Karen Bradshaw. Unfortunately, my instincts were right. Karen's arrest was just the beginning of a long and increasingly bizarre saga that would test my patience, my sanity, and my faith in humanity. The next few months were relatively quiet. I heard through the grapevine that Karen had been released on bail and was awaiting trial for trespassing and vandalism. I naively hoped that the threat of legal consequences would be enough to keep her away from my property. How wrong I was. It started small at first. I'd come up to the cabin for a weekend and find little things out of place. A garden gnome I definitely didn't own would be sitting on the porch. The welcome mat would be replaced with one that read Karen's Cottage. Once I even found all my curtains had been swapped out for frilly, floral ones that looked like they belonged in a grandmother's parlor. Each time, I'd sigh, undo whatever changes had been made, and remind myself to install those security cameras I'd been meaning to get around to. Then things escalated. I arrived one day to find a crew painting the exterior of the cabin a horrendous shade of pink. When I confronted them, they produced a work order supposedly signed by the property owner, one Karen Thompson. It took hours to sort out the mess, send the painters packing, and file yet another police report. By the time I was done, I was fuming. This woman was relentless, and it was clear that simply ignoring her wasn't going to make her go away. The final straw came about 6 months after Karen's initial arrest. I drove up to the cabin late one Friday night, looking forward to a peaceful weekend of fishing and relaxation. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights illuminated a scene that made me question my sanity. The entire front yard had been transformed into what I can only describe as a demented theme park. Inflatable castles, garish plastic flamingos, and blinking neon signs reading Karen's Kingdom littered the landscape. In the center of it all stood a life-sized cardboard cutout of Karen herself, arms spread wide, as if welcoming visitors to her twisted wonderland. I sat in my truck for a good 5 minutes trying to process what I was seeing. Then, with a deep sigh, I pulled out my phone and dialed a now familiar number. Ozark County Sheriff's Office, came the gruff response. "Hey, it's Jack Thompson again. You're not going to believe this, but..." Deputy Johnson arrived within the hour, and even he, who had seen his fair share of Karen's antics, was taken aback by the spectacle before us. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's really outdone herself this time." As we stood there, trying to figure out how to even begin documenting this mess, a rustling sound came from nearby. We turned just in time to see a figure darting out from behind a large inflatable unicorn. "Karen? Karen?" I called out, incredulous. "Is that you?" The figure froze, then slowly turned around. There stood Karen Bradshaw, dressed in what appeared to be a homemade queen costume, complete with a plastic crown and a scepter made from a bedazzled toilet plunger. "Welcome to Karen's Kingdom," she announced, waving her plunger scepter grandly, "where all your property dreams come true." Deputy Johnson and I exchanged glances, both of us at a loss for words. Finally, the deputy cleared his throat. "Ms. Bradshaw," he said, his voice strained with the effort of remaining professional, "you are in violation of your bail conditions and are trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to place you under arrest." "Again? Again?" Karen's regal demeanor crumbled instantly. "No, you can't do this to me. I am the queen of this realm." What followed was a chase scene so ridiculous it would have been rejected from a slapstick comedy for being too unrealistic. Karen, hampered by her voluminous costume, tried to flee through her inflatable obstacle course. Deputy Johnson and I pursued, dodging flamingos and ducking under balloon arches. Finally, Karen tripped over the train of her dollar store royal robe and face planted into a kiddie pool filled with plastic ball pit balls. As Deputy Johnson helped her to her feet and read her rights for the second time in 6 months, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and utter bewilderment. As Karen was led away, still protesting her royal status and the injustice of it all, I was left to deal with the aftermath of her latest invasion. It took the better part of the weekend and the help of a few bemused neighbors to dismantle Karen's Kingdom and restore my grandfather's property to its former, much more tasteful state. In the wake of this latest incident, I decided it was time to take more serious action. I hired a security company to install a state-of-the-art alarm system and cameras around the property. I also consulted with my lawyer about getting a restraining order against Karen. The legal process was slow and frustrating, but eventually, I was granted a restraining order that prohibited Karen from coming within 500 feet of the cabin or contacting me in any way. I hoped that this, combined with the multiple charges she was now facing, would finally put an end to her delusional crusade. For a while, it seemed to work. Weeks passed without any Karen-related incidents, and I started to relax and enjoy my time at the cabin again. I should have known it was too good to last. About 3 months after the Karen's Kingdom fiasco, I received a call from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who lived about a mile down the road. "Jack dear," she said, her voice quavering with concern, "I think you might want to come check on your cabin. There's been some unusual activity." My heart sank. "What kind of unusual activity, Mrs. Johnson?" "Well," she hesitated, "I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, but there's a large group of people there, and they seem to be worshipping something." I thanked Mrs. Johnson for the heads up, and immediately called Deputy Johnson. As we both raced to the cabin, I tried to imagine what fresh madness Karen had cooked up this time. Nothing could have prepared me for what we found. As we approached the property, we could hear chanting and what sounded like off-key singing. Rounding the final bend, we were met with a sight that defied belief. My front yard had been transformed into some sort of makeshift cult compound. Dozens of people dressed in flowing white robes milled about, many of them carrying signs with Karen's face on them. A crude wooden stage had been erected, upon which stood a familiar figure in an even more elaborate royal costume than before. Karen, her blonde hair now streaked with purple and piled high on her head in a style that could only be described as deranged beehive, was addressing her followers with the fervor of a televangelist. "My children," she cried, raising her bedazzled plunger scepter high, "we have been oppressed for too long. But fear not, for I, Queen Karen I, have seen the light. This sacred land has been promised to us by the great spirit of real estate." Her followers responded with enthusiastic cheers and more off-key singing. I noticed that many of them were clutching the same worthless real estate seminar certificates that Karen had tried to use to claim my property months ago. Deputy Johnson and I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process the scene before us. Finally, the deputy sighed and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Johnson. We're going to need backup at the Thompson cabin. Lots of backup. And maybe a psychiatrist?" As we waited for reinforcements to arrive, we watched Karen lead her followers in a bizarre ritual that seemed to involve waving real estate flyers in the air and chanting "the customer is always right" over and over. When the additional deputies arrived, along with a couple of state troopers and a crisis negotiator, we formulated a plan to disperse the crowd and apprehend Karen with minimal drama. Of course, Karen had other ideas. As soon as she spotted the law enforcement vehicles approaching, she let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. "My faithful subjects," she yelled into a bullhorn that had appeared out of nowhere. "The non-believers are here to test our faith. Stand firm. Protect your queen." What followed was a scene of utter chaos. Karen's followers, apparently as delusional as she was, formed a human chain around the stage. They began pelting the approaching officers with a barrage of real estate brochures and for sale signs. In the midst of the pandemonium, Karen made a break for it. Hitching up her robes, she leapt off the back of the stage and made a run for the woods, her towering beehive hairdo wobbling precariously. Deputy Johnson and I took off after her, leaving the other officers to deal with the cult members. We chased her through the underbrush, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs. Despite her cumbersome costume and impractical shoes, Karen was surprisingly agile. Just when it seemed like she might actually get away, karma, or perhaps just the laws of physics, finally caught up with her. As she glanced back to see if we were still in pursuit, she failed to notice the large tree root directly in her path. Karen's foot caught on the root, and she went down in a spectacular tangle of robes, limbs, and flying hair accessories. Her fall ended with a splash as she landed face first in a shallow creek. As Deputy Johnson helped the spluttering, mud covered Karen to her feet and read her rights for the third time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Surely, this would be the end of Karen's ridiculous crusade. In the aftermath of what the local paper dubbed the Battle of Karen's Cult Compound, Karen was charged with multiple felonies, including trespassing, vandalism, fraud, and inciting a riot. Her followers, most of whom turned out to be other victims of the same real estate scam, were offered counseling and help in recovering their losses. As for me, I was left with a property that had been the site of more drama in a few months than most people experience in a lifetime. But as I stood on the porch of my grandfather's cabin, looking out over the now peaceful yard, I couldn't help but smile. This place had always been special to me, a repository of cherished memories and a connection to my past. Now, thanks to Karen's ridiculous antics, it had a whole new set of stories to tell. Stories that I knew my grandfather would have gotten a real kick out of. In the end, Karen's desperate attempts to claim the cabin had only reinforced how much it meant to me. And as I settled into the old rocking chair on the porch, watching the sun set over the Ozarks, I knew that no matter what challenges came my way, this little piece of paradise would always be my true kingdom. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.